What's going on? My name is Francis, and if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that subscribe button and that notification bell because I post a new video every single day. If you want to become a private client, then consider applying for a free consultation by hitting the website that's in the description box of this video. What we're going to be talking about in this video is how to transcend pain or pleasure. Okay, because pain is going to come up in our lives whether we want it or not. So is pleasure. Both of these things are going to come up in our life. But it's not about the pain or the pleasure. It's about the attachment to either or. Because the attachment is the problem, and the attachment is where the suffering comes from. It's not the pain that the pain is not the issue. It's the attachment to the pain that is the issue. When you're attached, all attachment leads to suffering. Okay, Buddha once said that all attachment leads to suffering, and it really is the truth, because all the attachment is where the suffering comes from. And what is attachment? It really is the ego. Because what is the ego? It's unconsciously being absorbed in your thinking. Because here's the thing, is that a lot of us are unconsciously absorbed in our thinking without even realizing it. Okay, and this is creating a lot of suffering in our lives because we're attached to the thought processes without even realizing it. And that is where the suffering lies, is to the attachment. It's the attachment to the thought processes. If there's no attachment, then there's no suffering. It's not about the external circumstance, it's about the internal mental resistance to the external. And if you can release the internal mental resistance to the external, then there's no more suffering. The suffering only comes when you're internally mentally resisting what is happening. Otherwise, there's no suffering. There's literally no suffering that can happen if you're completely in full acceptance to whatever form comes up in reality. Because what you got to understand is that pain is going to come up in our lives. Pain is going to happen. But then if you're attached to it, that's where the suffering comes up. And here's the interesting thing, is that if you are attached to pleasure, you might be thinking, oh, wait a second, Francis, if I'm attached to pleasure, well, there's not really any pain involved there. Well, there is, because if you're attached to that pleasure and you're attached to feeling good, you're not even going to get the fullness of that experience. Because while you're experiencing that good feeling, there's a deep-rooted fear that when that feeling is over, you're going to feel bad. And you're scared that that feeling's going to go away one day. And you're attached to the good feeling. You're literally attached. And so while you're experiencing that good feeling, you're not able to get the fullness and the aliveness out of the experience in the present moment because there's an attachment to that good feeling. And so here's the interesting thing, is that if you release attachment to either or, what happens is you can actually experience the fullness of life and feel good regardless of what happens. And this doesn't mean that pain isn't going to come up sometimes. And it doesn't mean that pleasure isn't going to come up sometimes. It means that you're going to have this deep sense of peace regardless of what happens on the external. You're going to have that sense of awareness. And so that's really what I'm pointing you to, is I'm pointing you to a sense of existence that you always have, a sense of being present to the moment that's always there regardless of any outer form in reality, because forms are always changing, okay? Thoughts are always changing. Feelings are always changing. Emotions are always changing. Everything's always changing, and everything in reality is continually going to change. But if there's internal mental resistance to that change that is inevitably going to come up, then that's going to create suffering because you're attached to some kind of form that's coming in reality, whether that be a thought or a feeling or an emotion or an object or a relationship or something, whatever it is that, whatever form comes up in life. If there's attachment to that form, there's going to be suffering because that form is not going to last forever. That's the truth of reality. That's a truth that, exists in reality, is that everything is continually changing. And so if you attach to either form, whether that be a good form or a bad form, and there really is no such thing, the mind creates all of that. The mind labels things as good or bad. There's just simply form. Some might include a little bit more pain, but if you actually internally come into full acceptance to that pain, what you find is that it's not going to have that same effect on you as it did. This is why when certain monks meditate for hours and hours and hours, in the mountains or whatever, there comes a point where they mentally resist for the first couple years of their journey. They're meditating in these cold conditions. All these negative things are happening. But then what can happen is you can find an internal shift where what happens is, regardless of what happens on the external, you release the internal mental resistance to the external, where the same thing is happening on the outside, but then the internal interpretation of that experience changes. And then the suffering goes away. The suffering goes away when you release the mental resistance to the form, because usually what happens is, pain comes up, and then we tell ourselves that we shouldn't be experiencing this pain. We tell ourselves that I don't want to be feeling this pain, and then the mind doesn't actually allow you to fully feel that pain and fully come into acceptance. And if you start to become conscious enough doing things like meditation, if you go a little bit deeper into this work, what you'll find is that the mind literally creates the resistance and the suffering, not the pain. It doesn't create the pain. It's just interpreting the pain, labeling it as something that it doesn't want, which then creates the suffering. But here's the thing, is that if you fully bring your conscious awareness to anything in life and you fully accept it, there's no suffering. Okay, and this might sound radical to you. This might sound like it's unbelievable, but I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to, investigate this for yourself. And of course, this is going to be harder when it comes to really, really hard life situations, right? Can you detach from your pain when something really bad happens? That's for you to find out. But this is why you can train yourself and find out, can you actually apply this to your life, to the simple things that may usually make you mad, the simple things that cause resistance, right? If somebody cuts you off in traffic and usually you get mad, what you find is that it's not the person cutting you off, it's actually your interpretation. There's an unconscious autopilot response that says the moment should be some other way than it is. And so you see, it's not the situation, it's actually the interpretation to the situation. There's nothing inherently wrong with getting cut off in traffic, but when you automatically have that response that you've been conditioned to do and you're actually attached to that, that creates the pain. If there's even some kind of a physical feeling in your body, right, that has pain, the mind tends to not allow yourself to fully feel that pain, because when you bring full consciousness and awareness to something, it stops becoming as painful. It just, you kind of release the resistance. So when I started meditating every single day 3 years ago, what I found is that I can simply observe my thoughts rather than attach to them, okay? And then so when I began to simply be the awareness of my thoughts rather than attach to them, what I found is that I can simply allow negative thoughts to be there. Okay, I can simply watch them just like I'm watching clouds in the sky and simply allow them to be there. And then in the allowance is actually the letting go, because if you're unconscious of something, you can't let it go. You can't let go of something that you're unconscious of. And if you're unconscious of something, usually you're resisting it. And what you resist persists. And so in the allowance of that negative thought is the letting go. So it's not the situation that creates the resistance, it's the thought about the experience that creates the resistance. And so when you start to become present to the moment, what you'll find is that you can connect deeper to the fullness and the experience of life. But it begins not just with stepping out of the thinking mind and focusing on the present moment, which is an amazing first step. If you begin to bring your awareness from the thinking and you focus on your breathing, for example, or you focus on the energy field of your body, for a quick moment, there comes a sense of peace, right? Because you're stepping out of the thinking. There's certain activities that can put you in a flow state that also put you in this state. When I'm recording a video, I get into the flow state. I'm not as attached to my thinking. I'm just kind of in the flow. I'm in line, internally in alignment with the present moment, just kind of saying whatever comes up. But then here's the thing, is that when you're attached to the thinking, you can't experience the fullness of the moment. And it's not just about stepping out of the thinking, it's about noticing the underlying awareness that is in the background of all form. So no matter what happens in your life, no matter if there's pain, no matter if there's pleasure, you can simply have that sense of awareness that can observe it all. And you can start to notice that the mind actually creates resistance. You can start to notice that the mind is creating the problem. A lot of issues in our life literally is a concept. Literally, it's an imaginary concept. And so if what I'm saying is true, this is a radical insight to have. This is extremely significant. What I'm telling you is extremely significant, okay? I'm telling you that your mind creates the suffering, not the situation. And so if you investigate this a little bit further, what you'll find is that if you can't buy into this idea, then what you can investigate is that at least the mind is adding lots of suffering to situations. Because when you're unconsciously attached to the ego, when you're unconsciously attached to your thinking without realizing it, this is where anxiety lies. This is where fear lies. This is where worry lies. This is where impatience, agitation, and dis-ease, this is where it all comes from. It all comes from the ego, because you're not living in the moment. You're living in some other moment than this moment right now. And the ego is continually in resistance and in fear. It's not actually connected to what is truly happening. It's creating some imaginary reality that has nothing to do with the moment. The ego always wants to be in some other moment than this moment right now. But that doesn't make any sense, because the present moment is all that exists, right? And so when you're living in your ego, when you're stuck in your head, what's happening is that you're blowing situations out of proportion. You're reacting to things more than necessary. You're adding fuel to the fire. So if you can't believe in the fact that your mind is creating the suffering, can you believe that your mind is adding more suffering than necessary and blowing situations out of proportion, overreacting, right? What is an overreaction? That's exactly what it is. It's an overreaction. It's just reacting a little bit more than you need to. And that's the ego. It's not you. It's almost like this external force that automatically reacts, that you unconsciously get pulled into, because it's just a conditioning that, has been conditioned in your body, in your mind, but it's all happening unconsciously. And so when you can simply bring awareness to this, what you'll find is that you'll begin to notice that the ego is resisting the moment. You'll begin to notice that you are not your ego, and it's an identity that you've created in your mind that you're attached to. It's a falsely created identity that comes from attachment to thought form. And when you're attached to the thought form, you're also attached to pain and pleasure, because it's not really the pain and pleasure that you're attached to, it's usually the idea of it that you're attached to, okay? So the mind is what creates the suffering. It's not the situation, it's the mind. And you'll begin to notice this when you can simply have observation of the ego rather than attached to it. Okay, so that's all I have for you today. If you like this kind of content, then consider hitting that subscribe button and that notification bell, because I post a new video every single day. If you want to detach from your ego and transcend pain and pleasure, then just download the free guided meditation MP3 that's in the description box of this video to clear the mind and detach from the ego. It's completely free. You could just sign up and get that free MP3, and you can clear your mind and detach from the ego. So that's all I have for you today. If you like this kind of content, once again, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. If you want to become a private client, then consider applying for a free consultation by hitting the website that's in the description box of this video. Have yourself a great day, and see you in the next video.